University of San Diego.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first of all welcome you to our Spotlight Speaker Series presentation this evening. I'd first of all like to introduce our Dean, Dr. Paula Cordero, who makes all of this possible. Dr. Cordero. Dean of the School of Leadership and Education Sciences. My pleasure to introduce the presenter of the presenter, Dr. Nellie Meyer, who has been in San Diego Unified School District for 30 years, began as an instructional aide, and is now the Deputy Superintendent of Academics. Quite a trip that she has taken through the various chairs in San Diego Unified. Very proud of her. Especially important this evening that she presents our presenter as she did her dissertation on student voice. So without further ado, Dr. Nellie Meyer.
Hello and welcome. First of all, it is an honor to be here in this beautiful venue, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I would also like to thank Dean Cordero, who has made this Spotlight series a priority, as we have in San Diego. I'd also like to thank Frida Callahan and Richard Thome. All three. Tonight, we honor and recognize the voices in our profession that sometimes we don't hear, yet we always represent. And we represent them when we create schools, we represent them when we staff our classrooms, and we represent them when we create policy and make important budget decisions. Listening to the experts we always hear is very critical, and I would pose to you tonight that the experts that sometimes we don't listen to are the students in the classroom. The experts are the ones who are there all day, who see everything, and who have a distinct perspective that we need to recognize and celebrate. And quickly, I will give you one example. In San Diego Unified, we have atypical schools and continuation schools, as many of you do. And one day when I was visiting one of the continuation schools, I walked by and I said, "Oh, hi, nice to see you." And it was a student of mine when I was a principal of the high school. And I said, "How's it going?" And obviously I realized it was not going as well as I would have liked. So she said, "Great." And it started us asking the question, why do students leave and what keeps them there? So what we then did in turn was we got together and we had focus groups across our continuation schools, and we asked them that question. And tonight we're going to hear a lot about that answer. And their answer very specifically was respectful, caring adults, of course. But the surprise for me was that push us hard and monitor every move we make. Now, I do not hear that from my children, but I did hear it from our students. So that was very important, and I acknowledge that. So tonight we have an opportunity to listen to an expert, and a practitioner, a student, and I'm honored to introduce Adora Svitack. Adora is a junior in high school. She is an internationally published author, known for her essays, her blogging, her online critiques, and full-length books, of which you have one tonight. Adora first became known at the age of 6 when she was recognized by the local news in Seattle for her writing abilities. At the age of 7, she appeared with Diane Sawyer on Good Morning America, which is amazing. And also at the age of 7, Adora began writing blogs and online journals, and she comments on matters of both international significance and subjects of personal interest. Since that time, she's been promoting literacy for students, and she also has been advocating the importance of reading. In February, and it goes on, in February of 2010, she spoke at the TED conference, saying that the world needs different kinds of thinking. And her bold ideas, her creativity, and the optimism that comes with youth. Her quote, "Kids, big dreams deserve high expectations." And she says, starting with the adults, the willingness to learn from children that we teach. So it is my pleasure here tonight to inform you that the future is in good hands and that I would be very pleased to introduce Adora Svitack. Adora. I've also been asked to let you know that this will be an interactive conversation and that Adora is very interested in engaging the audience and that book signings will be available for after the discussion. Welcome, Adora.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Sorry, I ran up a little prematurely there. I guess that shows exactly how excited I am to be here, especially at the beautiful University of San Diego campus. I mean, when I first drove up here and I looked around, I was like, wow, I had no idea it was so beautiful, and then immediately added it to my short list of schools that I really need to start thinking about, which I'm sure you guys will be very glad about. As a junior, I guess I really do need to start looking at schools more seriously. I will have to begin touring and stuff, but for right now, it's definitely been an amazing journey of learning, of teaching, and I think that one of the most amazing things I realized over the course of my journey, speaking at conferences, getting to meet some exceptional teachers and students, is that even though people might say, like, you're special, you're an exception, or a prodigy, or any of these words, I find it extremely true that what each and every one of you, what ordinary students and teachers have to say is absolutely valuable and in fact crucial of learning that I've done. It's only when you know how to learn that you really know how to teach. And so I look forward to receiving some of the best new ideas, maybe for a future presentation from some of you in this room. Now, I titled my presentation "The New Kids on the Block, Youth Digital Culture and Student Voice in Education" because I was really interested in exploring with you the idea of these new innovative things that have come into play and how we can look at them as collaborators and not competitors. But I also wanted to tell you a story about something that happened just recently. So my mom and I, we flew here, we arrived, and as we were walking to our hotel room, I commented to her, "You know, I really belong at home with the campaign. I trust my team, but you know, it's in the hands of the voters now, and I feel a little nervous." You can take a look at my opening statement.
Hi, my name is Adora Svitack, and I'm asking for your vote for the 1st Congressional District here in Washington State. The famous poet Langston Hughes, one of my favorites, once asked in the 1951 poem, "What happens to a dream deferred?" I ask that question today because, as we see too often, it is one that is still relevant in American society. As we walk into a classroom and see students stuck in a 19th century model of education, too often condemned to pervasive inequalities because of race or income or zip code, we see dreams deferred. As we walk down the street, we see homeless veterans, America's heroes, receiving far less than what they deserve in return for their service to our nation, begging for money. This is a failure, and these are dreams deferred. In my personal life, I remember that my father always told me, growing up, in order to make anything a reality, you have to dream about it first. That was a mantra I carried with me, and it enabled me to achieve many of the goals I set out for myself. But the true power and promise of the American dream doesn't come from one person reaching their goals, reaching that pinnacle, making millions, achieving what they set out to do. It comes when you reach out a hand to help up your neighbor when they need it most. It comes when we band together after Hurricane Sandy, after Hurricane Katrina, in the wake of disasters, of tragedies, as well as in moments of national pride. When we unify to help each other, that is the power and promise of the American dream. I support equal rights for the traditionally marginalized communities in our society, LGBT, women, racial minorities, so that we can all achieve the hope and promise of the American dream. I firmly believe in carrying on the message that Edward Kennedy said in the 1980 Democratic National Convention speech. The work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die. Thank you.
So, as you might have guessed, I'm not actually running for the 1st Congressional District, sadly, because 2014 midterm elections are still 2 years away, and there is that pesky little age requirement. But this campaign that my team we threw ourselves into with quite a passion. We're 4 high school girls, 3 seniors, 1 junior, and me. And so my friend Hattie's the campaign manager, and actually on the first day in class when this whole project of running was announced, we immediately looked at each other. She was like, Green Party. And I was like, no, Democrats. And we went on until the teacher was like, ladies, quiet down. But I think that our efficiency puts some real life campaigns to shame because we filmed this in about like enough material for 5 advertisements over the course of one Wednesday afternoon. The reason that I was nervous earlier, wanting to be back at home with the campaign, was because today is fairly decisive in terms of voters' reactions. This morning, that video was shown to first period AP Gov. I have it. It's my 3rd class, and I have no idea how they reacted, what their thoughts might be, and how they'll vote. So it's a pretty high-stress moment for us. Now, you might be listening to this and thinking, hey, this is one project in one government class, and the voters are a bunch of your high school classmates. Take a chill pill, bro. But you see, the energy and enthusiasm around this one project, I feel evidence something a little bit larger. It isn't just the story of one girl who gets really, really excited by the chance to be a politician. This isn't just the story of an amazing team who is extremely dedicated to getting the candidate elected and determined to win on the issues that we believe in. This is a story of great teaching that inspires passion and engagement. In the 21st century classroom, I think that passion and engagement are more important than ever. In traditional education, you see knowledge and information being transferred in the same way time after time. Sure, maybe the blackboards have been replaced with whiteboards, but as I said in that opening statement, you walk into a classroom, you still see students stuck in what is largely a 19th century model of education, sitting in their neat little rows, looking up at the teacher as their primary source of knowledge. And that has changed very little from earlier days of public education in America, even as America and the world has changed around us. The internet has democratized access to knowledge to an unprecedented extent. All of you know this in your personal and in your work lives. You may have seen this as you are clearly able to access things that you might have had to go to a library, go to certain experts to get before. Now, what does this mean for educators and administrators? Is this scary, or is this a call for celebration? It might seem obvious, but I've seen reactions that definitely show both sides of that question. And the more important one, perhaps, is how should education leaders recognize where the changes are and the implications that has for implementing technology in education? What is the teacher's new role in the classroom when the students are no longer looking up to him or her as the only source of information? I think it's easy to think of these new kids on the block, the myriad sources that we have available for information and for content creation, as competitors instead of collaborators. And I'll admit I've seen why firsthand. In my school, we have a one-to-one netbook program. And more often than not, I will look around the room and see at least one person, usually more, on their computer, sometimes legitimately taking notes, sometimes playing a multiplayer shooter game with other classmates. The thing is that might surprise you or not, you know a lot of different students, but this happens just as much in my AP classes. In fact, my straight A friends are the ones who get away with doing this sometimes. Now, when you have this device that seems to hold an entire world of entertainment, information, and connection, it's easy to see why this could be a competitor to the teacher standing at the front of the room. I'd like to ask the students in the room a question and be honest. Have you ever in class checked your mobile device, your computer, gone on to something non-topic related? Raise your hand. Seeing a lot of raised hands here. And for the students who didn't raise your hand, either you're way better than I am or you're really good at lying. I know I have. I will admit it. I have. Before our school finally wised up and blocked Tumblr, I was reading about the secret lives of, or not so secret lives of various people and their complaints. That's mostly what Tumblr is. But I think that the important thing to realize is that this, instead of being looked at as something where, oh, we have to shut down the computers, we can't have students looking at screens because it's this competitor, we need to find the silver lining here. If we can change the false dichotomy of technology as either cure-all or evil, we can move toward a smarter vision of the intersection of data, technology, youth digital culture, and education in the 21st century. Out with the traditional blackboard and assignments, in with projects that have real-world impact, and students using devices for educational purpose. The new kids on the block are everything from the tools we own and master to how our cultural environment changes how we access information, entertainment, and our understanding of the world. Before I delve into the topic, allow me to quickly introduce how I got started in the first place with teaching and learning. So to start off, as I look at my own educational past, because I think that we can derive a lot of learning from our personal experiences, I'm glad that I didn't go to school for 10 years. Now you might be thinking, wait, she didn't go to school for 10 years, what is this? Well, when I was 3 years old, oops, those are my campaign posters. This is me at 3 years old. Yeah, I'm really proud of, I feel like that's really original. Super, super duper, I think the Obama team really ripped us off, but. This is me at 3 years old, decidedly less into politics. Actually, not that much. I was following Gore versus Bush. But I was really, really into reading and writing. This is me. That's my older sister, Adriana, and we just had the greatest time. We would teach each other. I feel like in thinking about learning, I saw a lot of the things that we work so hard to create in classrooms, peer-to-peer learning and students teaching teachers. It really happened organically and naturally. And we didn't really have to try that hard to do that. My sister taught me and I taught her, and it was I think it was really beautiful in a way, just looking back at it sentimentally now. So what created this environment was that I started learning at home with a group of other kids. They would come for the after-school programs, and my mom would hire teachers, and we would supplement that by taking some classes at my school district's homeschooling resource center. And I did a lot of creative writing at this time. Since I was very advanced in that field, I got to take classes with kids who were sometimes 7, 8 years older than me. And I'm glad that I had that freedom at an early age, because I was able to grow and develop at a pace that I would not have been able to do had I been trapped in the confines of bubbles on a worksheet. Our teachers, none of them were certified, I'm pretty sure. They were all recent college graduates, or some were still in college, as a matter of fact. But they were all incredibly passionate about their subjects. And I think that my mom really cared more about how much passion they had for a topic than whether they were following a strict sequence. I'm glad about that, because even though it meant that, sure, maybe I got to some things a little earlier or later than the other kids, I got to learn about subjects that some of my classmates and friends won't be able to get to until they're in college. Everything from art history to Mexican revolutionaries to human anatomy. And through our class connection with our tutors, we became as excited about the subjects as they did. The love was really contagious. And it wasn't your ordinary classroom in another way. The fact that it was customized to us as we developed and changed, got better at certain things, needed more improvement in others. My mom had regular conversations with the tutors, and anytime my sister and I felt like we weren't being engaged or something was just too hard and the teachers didn't understand, we would go straight to mom or we would go straight to them. I feel like that was a great way to involve student voice. We wrote a lot every single day. And I feel like today, a lot of my success that has been possible is because of that those early roots in writing and learning that was customized to us. Fast forward a few years, and the seemingly perfect little setup started to dissolve when we moved from Renton to Redmond. You might know this city as the headquarters of Microsoft, and hopefully some Redmond pride in the room. And so today I go to regular school. I also take 2 online classes, which helps me manage my travel schedule a bit. And in this way, I'm experiencing more of a blended learning model. Nevertheless, it's been a bit difficult at times to mesh with my extracurriculars, because I have some rather odd extracurriculars, you might say. Although I've spent less hours sitting in schools than many students, I've been to more classrooms than probably most of my peers. I've spoken at over 500 schools and classrooms to date, whether presentations to students or giving professional development sessions, speaking motivationally at assemblies about reading and writing. It really ranges a lot of different things. So how did I get started from being this regular student who was good at writing to becoming a teacher? Well, my aspirations started in a decidedly old school place with Little House on the Prairie. This is my Halloween costume from 2 years ago, actually, and which I think speaks volumes about how much I think I still had that latent desire to be a pioneer. But it was very much declared when I was little. I had this very special place in my 7-year-old heart for Little House on the Prairie. Like some of you, maybe I had the entire boxed set with the classic Garth Williams illustrations that had this shrine-like place on my bookshelf. And I wanted to be exactly like Laura Ingalls Wilder. I read about her adventures and misadventures from Wisconsin and North Dakota and how she became a teacher. And she was also this person who was younger than everyone else and having to prove herself to an older crowd. And I really related because I was always younger than everybody else. And when I started teaching, a lot of times my students who I would be talking to about writing and reading would be taller and older than I was. Now, this whole teaching thing, though, was a very strange career choice at 7 years of age because, and probably a lot of you have seen this firsthand, kids, you might ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And sadly, I feel like it's not something that a lot of kids or teenagers go to automatically. The idea of teaching being connected to being old is something that's very culturally ingrained as well. The Chinese word for teacher, lao shi, which I have completely butchered because I don't speak Mandarin that well or write it, it actually literally means old master. Now, when you take away the old from that, you don't have teacher anymore, which I feel like is rather unfortunate, considering that I was a young old master. So I felt, though, that since I had this passion about reading and writing, that I really wanted to translate it into helping others, and for me the most expedient way to do that was through teaching. So someone told me once when I was really young, maybe 6 I think, I don't like reading or writing in a nonchalant voice. And I kind of looked at her like, how is this possible? What dark magic is this? Because up until that point, you can call it childish naivete, but I just couldn't fathom a world in which people did not like to read and write. So that passion was what started me on my journey to become a teacher. Now, what if we could create more moments like this for students? We have to ask ourselves where the next generation of teachers will come from, and getting students deeply involved in subjects that they're passionate about, giving them the chance to help older and younger students. Creating the next generation of teachers doesn't necessarily start as, talking to a group of undergrad students and saying, think about teaching. It might start with a kid like me who was 7 years old. Now, through this unique role as a teacher and student across many mediums, whether online or in person, at a small homeschool or a large public school, I've found that increasingly the diversity of our students and the wealth of information we have at our fingertips necessitates a new school model where learning is customized for each student. In the olden days, you saw customization happen naturally because here's a picture of Aristotle and Alexander the Great. You would have a situation where a teacher would know one person very well and work with them for a long time. And we might not be able to give every student their own Aristotle. I feel like that could run into a few budget issues. I think we should aspire to build a new kind of school that allows every student to become one, that is, being able to question, think deeply, and have an impact. Creating this new school demands an awareness of youth digital culture and its role in our education, actively involving student voice, and meaningfully implementing data into decision-making and teaching. These days, and some of you might have been a little bit fatigued of this, hearing how much the world has changed. It's the 21st century. Look at everything that's changed and other variations of that, and I understand that. But it definitely is true that the jobs that we're preparing students for are extremely different from the jobs that maybe you applied for back when you were applying for your first job, or even some that were around 10 years ago. If you take a look at the list of jobs over at Twitter, and this is a company that didn't even exist when I was born, yet has made more money than I probably ever will in my lifetime, you can see that the open positions, they have some really interesting ones, a lot of things that I don't even know what they mean, but also some things that I would wonder, are students walking into school today being prepared for? Will they have the skills and knowledge necessary to get one of these jobs? There are all these things like software engineer, native applications. Are students learning how to code? Are students given the opportunity to learn more about computer science or managing any of these different kinds of skills that are required? You see a lot of these things like MySQL DBA. I have no idea what that means. I feel like I should, though, because if these are the kinds of jobs that will be available, that will pay well, that will build the 21st century economy, I think that I would at least want to know what they look like. So yeah, open positions at Twitter, and sadly, I'm pretty sure I would not be able to get any of them. Now, I'm okay with that because personally I'm not super crazy about working at Twitter, but I definitely think that students who walk into school should have the opportunity understand what those jobs are and how to be prepared for them. Many experts in the corporate world, advertising agencies and companies have realized exactly how important it is to transform their approach to advertising to align with where their customers are, in the other word, online. The traditional one-way print advertising world has been replaced with one that's a lot more varied, that has digital components and social media components. Advertisers are truly reaching customers where they are, on the computers. Education, too, can reach us where we, the customers or the students, are online. Some people might say that this approach really denigrates the authority of teachers. The teachers should stay a bit removed from the culture, the experience of students. However, to me, the best teachers are the ones who really understand what we're going through as students, who make it a priority to understand youth and our digital activities and social connections on the internet. After all, they also always say, know your audience. When teachers demonstrate their interest and know how to navigate this world that we're so familiar with, they gain a lot of reliability and relevance. For many of my generation, the internet can truly be described as a second home. We're on social media constantly contributing and consuming content, and we can build up careers this way. There's a rapper and Seattle native, Macklemore. Some of you might have heard his music, and he's been releasing music since 2000. But I and a lot of my classmates and friends had never heard of him until his latest album, The Heist, really took off. It hit the top of the charts on iTunes, and people started sharing his music like crazy. There was a time when I would go on Facebook, and literally I would scroll down, and probably out of 10 posts, like 6 would be one of his songs. I didn't pay too much attention to it at first, but when that happened, I was like, wait, who is this dude? Why have I not heard of him before? And I started listening to his songs. And I think that my parents are getting annoyed by how much I've been repeating playlists and stuff, but it is definitely hot stuff because of how much people shared it, because of how viral it went on social media. And through our own brand of humor, we can teach each other about social issues and lessons beyond the classroom. Youth digital culture provides huge insights about how my generation plays as well as learns. So let's do a quick refresher course. FTW stands for A, feed the world, B, for the win, C, forget the word, or D, finish the work. Raise your hand for A. Okay, raise your hand for B. All right, raise your hand for C. And raise your hand for D. That was a pretty mixed response. I see a lot of D. Well, if you're doing something FTW, it's for the win. And I saw a lot of people, yeah, nice group over there. And so let's do another one. Raise your hand if you know what YOLO means. Oh, I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. Yay. All right, go ahead. You want to tell us what YOLO means?
Something about laughing out
Another brave soul? Go ahead.
You only live once.
You only live once. That's right. Awesome. We have So yeah, YOLO, you only live once. That's been used and overused. I mean, at this point, if you use YOLO, then probably you will have some people who are out to get you because it's pretty redundant, but it's basically like carpe diem except not that intellectual. Latin makes everything sound smarter. YOLO is, I don't know, I find it really representative kind of how we can abbreviate things and it'll just spread all over the place. And they're the new OMG and ROTFL, not because people don't use OMG and ROTFL, we definitely still do, but rather because so many people use FTW and YOLO often in this form that they've even spawned digital memes and people see them all over the place. Now, the fact that we can just, with our keyboards and with enough texting and messaging and Facebook posting, basically create new words or new abbreviations that have become really easily recognizable, this shows that we can have an influence on the cultural landscape as creators of content and not just consumers of it. And we share content in ways that you might not have been familiar with, say, a few years ago. Raise your hand if you've seen popular memes before. Seeing some raised hands and seeing some blank stares. Well, when I log into Facebook, I'll see some, oh God, that was way too big. There'll be This is the troll face. You don't want to see that too much. But this is a world that my parents just don't understand. if I tell them, like I was talking to my mom a while ago, and she said, "What do you mean when you said your parents don't understand memes? What is a meme?" And I was like, "Proving my point, Mom." But here is, if you want to see more memes, they're like all over the place, but Meme Generator has a lot of them. They will be offensive sometimes, sorry. This is kind of like, there's the, oh gosh, yeah, so they basically, some of them look like this. Yeah, so this one's, oh, wow, okay. There are some like really, really awful ones, but okay, yeah, sexism, I see that. And that one over on the right, the Willy Wonka meme, it's sometimes called sarcastic Wonka, or you'll see different names for it, and he's basically asking a question, he's like, "Tell me more," sarcastically. And so you'll see the ones that are super popular, you can go through, and these are the ones that are just like inescapable. Here are the characters, and you basically add text. And they've come from really weird places. I mean, you have Willy Wonka, right? Success Kid is getting away with something. The Why You Know, Most Interesting Man in the World is kind of hilarious to me because it's from a Dos Equis ad. And like all these people who aren't even old enough to drink are using the Most Interesting Man in the World meme. Like, I don't always blank, but when I do, blank, for unrelated, not alcohol-related things, but just as a meme. And they don't even know where it comes from, which to me is kind of hilarious, that memes can put something into the cultural canon so irremovably, yet it'll become removed from where it originally came from. So yeah, these are inescapable. If you just go to like Facebook and you're friends with enough teenagers, you will at some point see a meme being shared out. They can be pretty funny sometimes, but yeah, you do have to be, they're also often a bit politically incorrect sometimes. So it's memes like this that are instantly recognizable to a lot of teenagers, a lot of students, and whether we're looking at, creating, and sharing memes, watching YouTube videos or making them, reading celebrities' Tumblrs, or becoming YouTube stars, we aren't sitting back and taking a passive role, waiting for adults to tell us what to watch, read, or make. The question is, what is the lesson here for education from all this seeming tomfoolery as we strive to build a model of school that's relevant for my generation and the ones to come? Well, what if we could make learning as shared and viral as memes on Facebook or videos on YouTube? What if we could use the connections of the online world to bring schools and young people closer? One thing to realize is that while social networking sure is primarily about socializing, not education, there are many cases, often quite student-initiated, where we use Facebook as a sort of 21st century study hall. I'm part of a bunch of student-run, non-teacher approved, non-teacher disapproved either, don't worry, groups on Facebook comprised of the fellow students in my classes where we share tips and information, post resources, and yes, admittedly, sometimes, like any real-world study hall, complain enthusiastically. I also, I took, the snapshot I took over there, this is actually from a class I had last year, biology, and I recall that there was a tech issue with this virtual lab we were supposed to do, and someone was like, should we all try to email her? And classmates said yes, it would increase our chances of sympathy. So there was some scheming going on. But all in all, I found that this was a really great example, and most of my classmates have Facebook groups for a lot of their classes as well. It was a great example of how we can collaborate for a common good online and actually focus on education. So my AP Gov campaign was organized on Facebook. We were posting the new videos, and it eliminated the need for us to get together and spend a whole lot of time filming new stuff when we could just collaborate virtually. Much as I love these groups, though, it's still a relatively shallow use of technology compared to the possibility for online projects to give students more purpose in our learning. This, to me, and many of my peers, is probably one of the most pressing and important foundations of innovation in education for the future. The ideal new school is one where all students feel purpose in their learning. When I say purpose, though, I don't necessarily mean I'm going to use it every day in my job, or this is a skill that I will literally have to use for years to come. I mean, I study algebra because I want to understand the world around me better and being able to understand higher sciences, not because I'm realistically ever going to be using polynomials walking down the street. But we rarely give students the opportunity to directly see connections between what they're learning sitting in the classroom to life. how will I use this? How do I build on this to move on to higher things? And when the answer to why are you doing this schoolwork isn't unsatisfying because you'll need it on a test, or because you'll need it later, or because this class is a graduation requirement, then students can tune out and become disengaged. If school is supposed to be preparation for life, we're preparing students for an awfully strange life. A series of tests with multiple choice answers, or a big project worth 200 points occasionally. I mean, I wouldn't complain if the crises in my life handed me an A through E set of options that made total sense and had one right answer, but I think you and I know from your professional lives, from your personal lives, that no problem in life ever handed you a bubble sheet. So we know the problem, that very rarely do students get the chance to put something they've learned into action in a way that has positive results for the community, and where they can see something that I've learned is actually viable as far as using it later and having an impact. What we do to help the world is usually, like in my case, extracurricular. I don't get any credit for giving a speech or for teaching a group of students about reading and writing. So how can we change this? Well, I recently participated in something called the National Education Startup Challenge, and it was this contest launched by the Department of Education. So I worked with my friends Maya and Priya, and we discussed a pretty interesting prompt, which was how to use technology to benefit students in urban schools who were lacking skills for college and career. So we made a video pitch. We actually were one of the winners, which was kind of cool. We got a little recognition from the Department of Ed. And our idea was this application for the future. So we said, bridge the achievement gap, build an app. And students would work with mentors from technology fields and practice writing, reading, STEM, teamwork, etc. through building and marketing this app over the course of 6 months and then showcasing them at a large technology conference. So here's our pitch.
They said that I didn't have the technology skills I needed for the job.
What are my acting skills?
Now there's an app for that. Application for the Future. This innovative new startup provides students in underserved school districts with the unique opportunity to build 21st century skills through designing an app. Working in teams of 5 with expert volunteer mentors from technology fields, students will refine their products to bring to a larger audience at the Consumer Electronics Show in January. Through the collaborative process, students will develop their teamwork and leadership skills, practice writing with clarity, and obtain valuable STEM skills, all in the context of a real-world assignment. Bridge the gap, build an app. Application for the future!
I have no idea why I made that fist there, by the way. There's like nothing violent about application for the future whatsoever. The entry is obviously hypothetical, but what I would love to see would be such programs actually being put in place that give students the chance to apply the skills that they've learned from their math and science classes, from business or marketing classes, and to actually possibly make income or at least see the app in the hands of people, students, and maybe even people outside their city or state. The chance to authentically use what we learn is something that is way more motivating than an A on a test. To switch gears a little bit, I want to ask another question to the students in the room. Have you ever helped an adult or someone older than you with a piece of technology before? Seeing some raised hands here? Yeah, definitely. I can attest to this experience. And for some of the adults in the room, maybe you remember helping your parents or grandparents with technology as well. It's not necessarily just a my generation thing. But my mom has asked me, like, hey, something's wrong with my iPhone. Can you fix it? My email isn't receiving this. Will you change that for me, et cetera? And I won't go into detail about the number of times she's asked this because she would probably get a little mad at me. But I think that the point is that it's really awesome to have this reciprocal learning going on. I mean, we learn from our parents, our grandparents, our older relatives every day, and suddenly we have this chance to return the favor and help them. It's awesome to see when adults and teachers are really open-minded about this. And I realize that this is a growing part of the new technological landscape, where the younger generation is suddenly enabled to have more knowledge or at least feel more comfortable with using certain interfaces and technologies than their parents or grandparents might be. So I wanted to sort of formalize this way that students can help their teachers. So I created a video series called Teach Teachers Tech. And it's over at A Platform for Good, which was a collaborative project between some of the largest tech companies, including Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Yahoo. And if you take a look also at this video, Your Homework, Launch a Movement, then I speak to the opportunities for clear impact from learning. Hi, I'm Adora Svitack. History teaches us that passion inspires collaboration. Just look at any successful movement for change. We can bring that same passion to the classroom by using online tools that facilitate activism. I'd love to imagine getting the assignment to start a movement. That would be pretty epic. Change.org is a great place to start. It's a site for individuals and groups to post petitions for pressing issues they believe in. Many success stories have come from students on Change.org. 3 teenage girls successfully called for the first female moderator of the presidential debates in 20 years. A 4th grade class in Massachusetts led Universal Studios to launch environmental partnerships around their promotion of the Lorax. And students in Sun Valley School in California asked Crayola to start recycling its markers, receiving over 80,000 signatures on their petition. In all these examples, students had the chance to interact with a real audience and spark action on a real issue, a perfect example of collaborative learning. There are plenty of roles for everyone: researching the issues, writing the content, and looking into ways of raising awareness and gaining support. These are all things that help us become great learners. We get the chance to learn from our peers, think critically, and practice good digital citizenship. So I give a lot of credit to the students who came up with petitions like the ones that you saw mentioned over at change.org. But again, I think that it's also really worthwhile realizing those 4th grade students, well, they are special, but they're not special in the sense of, oh, they're super gifted, or it's just one class that has, really good social conscience or something. This represents the promise of students everywhere. It doesn't have to be one special class or a certain group of students who's like, I totally feel really strongly about the Lorax and environmental partnerships. It could be any class, in high school, middle school, elementary school. Ask yourself, are there students in my classrooms, in my schools, in my school district, who could work together, who could band together on an issue that they're passionate about, that affects the community or the nation or the world, and really inspire change? Because I think that the potential of the students who walk into those classrooms every day is more than getting an A on a test or performing super well on state standardized tests and reaching their benchmarks. I think that they can really change the world. And there's another opportunity, one that I noticed recently at connecther.org. Their high school and undergrad students are invited to submit 3 to 5 minute short films that address global women's issues like education for girls, maternal health, violence against women, and a variety of other issues. And seeing that, I thought, now that would be a perfect idea for incorporating in a social studies class, for incorporating possibly in language arts if students are working together on writing a persuasive script or an expository script. There are so many ways that you could tie a project with real-world impact, something that helps the greater good, to curricular topics. So do you have any ideas, since this is an interactive session, as far as a project that would have an impact that connects to something, say, in history, language arts, math, science, any other topic in school? Yes?
To make change.
An environmental concern, addressing that and what students can do to make a change. Awesome idea. So actually, in Utopia, one of my favorite examples of doing exactly that, the science teacher in Arizona challenged students to find an issue that was relevant to science and that was affecting their community, and they discovered this thing called buffalo grass, which I guess was brought in as a cheap way to feed cattle, and then it really just spread, and as a non-native plant and one that was really fire resistant, it became extremely dangerous, edged out a lot of natives, so they made a really dramatic rap video about it, spread awareness, started a Facebook page, got like 600 likes and stuff. Now to me, that is a great example, addressing environmental concern. They learned a ton about science, and they were motivated because getting together with your friends and making a rap video is one thing. That's fun for any project, but when you actually see it changing people's minds or raising awareness, that's truly awesome. So great idea right there, and it can definitely be done. Any other ideas?
My students to reach out to the communities to help support, and to people in the communities and professionals in the communities to help support us in issues and things financially, also to help our schools financially and to donate, because they have more money than we do, and they have, and I've actually reached out this year and had guest speakers and people coming into my class that are inspiring kids to ask really deep questions of what's going on out there, what's going on with our economy. And I don't have any guest speaker funds, and I don't have funds for materials in my classroom, but I'm not having any problem finding people coming in, and it's all generated by the kids. Kids are telling me, well, who they want to listen to and who might be able to help us. And I think if it comes from the kids, we get that help, and that's kind of an idea.
That's really terrific. Encouraging students to work, to bring in guest speakers, really motivating them, also to help bring resources to the class. I think that's an amazing example. Actually, a really good, this is still in beta. They've had a lot of success with their early integration already, but Piggybacker is teaching youth how to fundraise, and I think that they've worked with a lot of awesome classes, teams. They were featured in a few magazines. So they not only, I mean, it's not just your typical like fundraising website, it actually teaches students how to write persuasive letters to people and really build those skills, getting fundraising ideas and help, so that definitely speaks to that aspect. And I think that you can do a lot of learning. Anyone who's done like even a magazine drive, you know that knocking on doors, talking to people, really building connections, you learn a lot. And same with emailing someone who you really, really desperately want to be a guest speaker. I know that people who have like tried to get folks that they really admire, like an author or an expert, to come speak to their school, they would really think, you know, what makes our school deserve this person to come, and like think of reasons, use their best persuasive writing skills to a level that sometimes you might not see if they're writing a paper just for the teacher to read. So yeah, that's a wonderful way to get students motivated to write, to really practice their organizing as well. Any other ideas? Yes?
I was wondering, in your travels and in your presentations, have you seen a website or schools or kids? I'm trying to have my students help me write grants and come up with great grant ideas for great learning opportunities. And my last grant that I got, they helped me write it.
Wow.
And so now but that took a lot of sweat and time. I was wondering if there's something like this in your travels or in your experience. Have you heard of any websites or help for teachers and students to collaborate to write grants for schools? Because I think that's where we're going in education, to support our schools, to support our classrooms.
That's a great question. I have actually not heard of a website that's specifically around grants. I know that there are like more fundraising oriented ones, but I think that's an awesome idea and really bringing students into, oh, Kickstarter's similar, not quite the same, not oriented towards Kickstarter, not quite oriented towards education. That's like crowdsourcing funds for projects. But on the issue of students writing grants or helping write grants, I think that is an excellent example of real-world involvement. I've actually always wanted to learn how to like write a grant and be involved in a nonprofit or a school in that way. And I think that it also helps as far as raising respect for students, because when decision makers and stakeholders in the district see, wow, students are actually really being deeply involved in this, helping on something that is driving funds and resources towards the schools, then I think that there's a lot more listening to student input. So great idea, and I hope that that takes off. If there isn't a website specifically toward that, I hope that you might start blogging or talking about that so that I can share that out. Yeah, exactly, how the kids create a website.
You talked a lot about collaboration. Could you share with us what kids think about competition and online competitions? What does that do?
What kids think about competition, specifically online competition? Great question. I think that that has a lot of different aspects. I know that competition can be used really well as a motivating force. It can also be somewhat detrimental to necessarily learning for intrinsic value. I see that because a lot of my peers, I mean, I take 3 AP classes, and a lot of my peers are the pretty traditional, like really super motivated, all about school, straight A's, or, you know, straight A or the highway. I'm pretty sure that's not a thing, but if it was, that would be their mantra to life. You know, so I see where competition can kind of have a flip side of taking out some of the joy of learning, I guess. But I think that when competition is used wisely, in the example that, like, of my campaign, I'm running against people in my class, it definitely motivates me to work harder because I do not want to lose to that guy sitting next to me. In cases where I think competition drives kids further because they're really passionate about the subject that they're competing about, as opposed to, oh, I have to get 99% on this or whatever, it can be used really well. One area as far as competition online, where I think is really effective, and this kind of ties into the whole idea of having positive change as well. Some of you might have heard of free rice. So this is a really easy question example, but they have all kinds of subjects, different levels of subjects, and every question that you answer correctly will go and support the World Food Program through sponsors. Where competition comes into this is that you can actually create a group, and a lot of classrooms have created groups and they'll compete against each other. So at the same school, maybe Ms. Smith's classroom will have a free rice challenge against Mr. Willis's classroom, or even different, in a different schedule, like Ms. Smith's period 3 class would compete with the period 4 class. And so they're all, I kind of enjoy the top chart because it seems to be consistently the atheists, the Christians, and the nerds against hunger are always like dueling it out for the top 3. I'm seeing like atheists are on the top right now, but I've also seen, Buddhists and Muslims are always pretty consistently at the top here. So yeah, that's an example of competition working awesomely to help the world. And you know, it's way better to get out all of that. We're so much better than you feeling on here than in other ways, I think, since it goes to help people who are truly in need. So yeah, great example of competition and how it can be a motivating force. Any other ideas of projects with real-world impact connecting to curricular topics? All right, so to move on. In the Teach Teachers Tech video, you saw what I see as the new project-based learning. Traditional project-based learning still doesn't really break free of the bounds of the classroom walls. I see this firsthand because my sister, for instance, she once did a project in her 9th grade honors world history class where she had to make a map of India, or a 3D map of India, I should say. And so she spent about 2.5 hours using this, like, rolling out a giant sheet of clay and cutting it painstakingly to be in the shape of India, and then she painted it, and then she cried because the paint made it not look Indian or something. I have no idea how that worked. And took these little blue beads and stuck them in to become the Ganges River. And I looked at that and I thought, okay, this is kind of a waste of time, but my belief that it was a waste of time was really solidified when we went to India and she had no idea where anything was. I mean, if you make a 3D map of India, one would at least hope that the geography sticks, but nothing but the clay really did. So this is an example of where a project that was worth a lot of points. It might look pretty. It might make for a nice thing to stick in the corner of a class or put up on a wall, but it doesn't stick in here, and that's what really matters. And it doesn't have an impact anywhere else but inside that class. So outside of class, I think that students can get really invested in the issues that we care about. The PBS, or the documentary Half the Sky, which was aired on PBS recently, I watched it, and it was all about the moral imperative to solve the problem of the disenfranchisement of women and girls around the world, and it had some extremely poignant stories, and it really profiled the problem unblinkingly. And so I was talking about it with some of my friends at lunch, and I was honestly, I think I had low expectations to some extent of my peers, because I was surprised talking with these other girls at the extent to which everyone was really riled up and wanted to do something. The fact that we even spent our entire lunch time talking about this issue and what we could do. So you might think, or you might have this image in your head of apathetic teenagers who don't really get into issues, who don't really care too much about the election or what's going on in the world or current events. But when we find an issue that makes us angry or that makes us sad or that we really take pride in or want to get involved in, we will do as much as we can to that end. And if we can channel that same motivation, that same drive, that same enthusiasm and passion into something that we're doing in your class or in the classrooms across your school or school district, imagine the amount that we can learn. So if you want to find out more about different projects that could be possible or different ways to get students involved, you could take a look at, I wrote these articles for Mashable. One was about 5 groundbreaking competitions for innovative youth. So you have things like the Google Science Fair, the Imagine Cup from Microsoft, the Intel Science and Engineering Fair, the Siemens Math, Science and Technology Competition, the DuPont Challenge Science Essay Competition. You'll see it's pretty STEM focused. unfortunately in this article, also since it was on Mashable Technology blog, most of that stuff was technology related. And then I also wrote another article on Mashable about social good, profiling websites like freerice.com that enable students to have, make an impact in social good. Imagine if you challenge your students to participate in something like this in science class. They would probably learn a whole lot over the course of participating in a contest or competition like this one, an amount that they might not learn sitting and listening to a couple lectures, which is a bit provocative maybe to say, but I think that it's true. Not to mention that this is incredibly motivating. So the new project-based learning, I think, allows students to really have a footprint, to have an impact, and to see the change that is enacted because of the actions they take. There are some excellent examples of how the internet can empower us to do good and really do more than say, hey, what's up, LOL and OMG. So I use the internet really heavily, social networking I should say to be more precise, and organizing TEDx Redmond, which is a conference. How many of you have heard of TED? Thanks for raising hands. Oh wow, almost everyone, that's awesome. Generally when I speak to education conferences or crowds who are administrators and educators, the number of hands raised isn't quite that large. So TEDx Redmond is an independently organized TED event. There are thousands of these that happen around the world, the TEDx's. And so ours is a little bit unique in the sense that we have an all-youth board of organizers. We have every speaker 19 or under, and the majority of our audience is young people. So this was the third year that we organized it. We had 20 people on our committee, and 1,000 people showed up, which was a little bit crazy. We made continual jokes about how some of our volunteers had to be enlisted to be bouncers, because that was how much everyone wanted to get in. And we used everything from Facebook to Gmail, Google Docs, Google+, Skype, Wikis, YouTube. I think that we used, we tried to do a Google Hangout at one point. For some reason, it malfunctioned a little bit, but we persisted. I think that's another thing, the adaptability and the persistence, even when things don't work, that really marked our group's use of technology as successful. It's crucial to how we found sponsorship, organized and marketed the event, and distributed our talks. The TEDx Redmond event and all the speakers at TEDx Redmond really helped show that technology plus young people doesn't have to equal inane abbreviations and distracting chatter. It can equal good for the world. The same is true of education plus technology plus young people. Another way to give students purpose and allow us to help the world is to let us teach. And I spoke to this point a bit earlier when I mentioned 7-year-old me and how inspired I was to become teaching and where we need to get the next teachers from. I know for sure that teaching has made me a better learner. Probably a lot of you know this firsthand from when you began teaching. Maybe you were tutoring somebody else, or maybe you were trying to explain a difficult math problem and suddenly you realized, wow, now I understand this inside and out or in more depth than I ever could have imagined before. And the same is true for me in writing, because when I started giving these presentations, working collaboratively with students to build stories, I realized where my own weaknesses were, and I tried to address those vulnerabilities. Currently, I've taught quite a few schools, and I've learned over the process that the teacher shouldn't necessarily be this person in the almost suit of invincible armor of knowledge that is so much superior to everyone else. One of the things that I felt made me able to connect with students really well as a teacher was the fact that I told them I'm still learning just like you. So when teachers can do that, and when teachers can do that effectively, I find that incredibly empowering. One way a lot of teachers are doing that is by giving students the chance to teach them, whether about how to use technology effectively in the classroom or other things. I see this as one of the best things about the ease of content creation today. The fact that young people like me can get up on YouTube and deliver these presentations and have them watched by hundreds or even thousands or tens of thousands of people around the world. This would not have been possible if I were born a couple decades earlier. Of course, sometimes my peers will go online and upload things that aren't quite so helpful. How many of you have seen Friday by Rebecca Black? Some raised hands. Okay, so don't worry, I'm not going to show it. But for those of you who have not seen it, look it up. You'll really enjoy it. There are also examples where students upload things that you might say are even harmful or distracting at the very least. But I think that the approach that we have to take to technology is a smart one, where students are encouraged to upload the right kind of content and given the chances to do so. So the trend of students teaching is really catching on. At mathtrain.tv, you can find students making videos about all kinds of topics in mathematics. I've used that website myself to get math help, and it's really encouraging to know that your peers are actually helping you along. At TED, they've started a new initiative called TED Ed. So they have Lessons Worth Sharing. It's in beta right now. They have these amazingly, beautifully animated videos about all kinds of crazy topics, dark matter to finding habitable worlds, and they're really neatly animated, kid-friendly, all ages, and they use the craziest techniques to teach about some things that you might say are really boring, like the Electoral College explained, and many others. So all kinds of topics. A glimpse of teenage life in ancient Rome. I need to watch that one. But what makes TED Ed really cool is the fact that it doesn't encourage just passively watching some really cool videos. You can actually go and do something called flipping a lesson. So if I go and I find, I'm going to click on what I would feel is a topic I wouldn't generally look for videos under, which is business and economics. So I'm going to try to challenge myself, and I'll click rethinking thinking. So that sounds interesting. So I can play the video, but what I can do now is I can flip this lesson. So I'm going to log in. And what flipping lets me do is customize and share it. So if you're a teacher and you have a class that you want to share a video with, you can title it. So you could say AP Economics. And then you can edit the description. You can write questions. You can remove or exclude a question. You can change the dig deeper question. You could even add in some closing thoughts. You would hit finish flip, and then you can send it to all of your students. So if you want to make it private or unlisted, you can do so. When you finish the flip and you send it to your students, you can see who's clicked on it, how they've answered the questions, whether they watched the whole video. You get a whole lot of data, which I think is super powerful. What's more, however, not only can you flip the videos that are already on TED Ed, but you can actually create your own lesson by simply filming something, uploading it to YouTube, and then flipping it on ed.ted.com. So one thing that the people at TED Ed said they didn't even expect, though, was when a little girl in England who was 9 years old just went on YouTube, made a video about how to sew. She got out her sewing machine, and she flipped it on TED Ed. And that really started something where students would begin teaching on TED Ed and on YouTube and other places. So to show an example of what this could look like.
Hi, my name is Karen Manor, and today we are going to talk about germs. Hand germs, sneeze germs, achoo, and even keyboard germs. Germs are not for sharing. Did you know that one bacterium weighing 1/1,000,000th of a gram can kill a blue whale weighing over 100 million grams? Such is the power of germs. Now let's examine the science behind germs. Before Antony van Leeuwenhoek discovered his wretched beasties, or germs, under his microscope in the 1600s, we assumed disease was caused by either evil spirit or naughty parents. You see, when King Tut died of tuberculosis at the ripe age of 18, his people assumed it was because of the sins of his father. In other cultures, where diseases were believed to be caused by evil spirits, shamans would dance around the sick person and slather animal poo on his body. There are actually 4 kinds of germs. Bacteria, which cause sore throats, ear infections, and cavities. Viruses, which cause chickenpox, measles, and the flu. Fungi, which causes athlete's foot. And protozoa, which causes the runs. Bacteria are one-celled creatures that get nutrients from their environments to live. But not all bacteria are bad. Some bacteria, like the kind you can find in yogurt, help break down the food and absorb nutrients, which makes you live longer. In fact, Bulgarian nomads who eat a lot of yogurt are known for their very long lives. So, how do we protect ourselves from these wretched beasties? Wash your hands. Well, that's all for today. This is Cameron with Cam Science News.
So you can see what will happen when students really take initiative and think, I want to teach something, I'm passionate about a topic, how do I make this engaging and entertaining? And I think that I learned a lot as well about exactly that, how to be engaging and entertaining, because it never would have occurred to me to teach about bacteria and germs by using stuffed animals and, acting out shamans dancing. That part is still my favorite. There are a lot of awesome moments and laugh lines in here, but I think that the really important thing to realize is that not only are we benefiting as the audience or whoever's learning from the video, but also think about how much she probably learned through the process of how am I editing this to make it really interesting for a viewer? How do I write this script so that it's interesting and funny? How do I make sure the information is relevant and accurate and all of this stuff? So the process of teaching, again, making someone a better learner. On the more writing.
Hi again. In this clip, I'm going to tell you how I wrote my books. It all started with National Novel Writing Month, a program on the internet which challenges you to write a book in 30 days. They have lots of worksheets and tips to help you as you work. You have to set a goal for how many words you want to write, which we call a word count goal. For my first book, I set my word count goal at 2,000 words. That may sound like a lot, but really it's only 5 or 6 sentences a day. To get started, I wrote an outline and created characters. To make an outline, I wrote some short notes to remind me where my story was going. For example, my outline for Chapter 1 in Birds on the Run said something like this. Eva meets a hummingbird. We meet the bullies, and Eva protects the hummingbird from the bullies. When you're writing a book, you have to think about 3 things: setting, characters, and plot. It's easy. Setting means the time and the place the story happens. Birds on the Run is set in modern times. It takes place in both North Dakota and South Carolina. Characters are people, animals, monsters, or whoever is in the story. Birds on the Run features Eva, the hummingbird, the bullies, Eva's mom, Eva's grandmother and cousins, a school principal, and an airplane steward. In the next video, I'll tell you more about plot, and we'll take a roller coaster ride together.
Isn't she adorable? So I looked at that and I was like, wow. I mean, not only did she get started making videos and teaching earlier than I did, which I feel gives me a whole lot of hope as far as what the next generation is doing, how early they're starting to teach and really become interested in helping others and spreading a message about writing. But also, I saw this is something that everyone can do because the tools that they use, it's nothing special. It's maybe like screen capturing technology, a webcam, and YouTube. And that's something that most people can find access to, whether at school or perhaps by asking parents or friends. So the ease of content creation really doesn't need to be looked at as a problem that opens up possibilities for distraction. It can be looked at as an amazing solution and a way to encourage students to become the next teachers. So we can do this online and share that out to our schools, to our friends, and to younger students around the world. We can also provide tech support for our teachers. I talked about Teach Teachers Tech, that project, which outlines a lot of different useful tools for educators. And there are nonprofits like Generation Yes and Mouse Squad that really propose the idea of formalizing students as tech support in a way in their classrooms. So the important thing to remember is that technology, while sure it allows us to see things better, to have the opportunity to watch videos on larger screens, to interact with a whiteboard or whatever it may be, the real power of the internet, of the new tools that we have at our fingertips, is the two-way communication. The ease not only to be able to consume, but to create. And giving students the opportunity to take advantage of both of those things, I think, is imperative as we move forward. Because what I've been seeing a lot of right now is we have these netbooks in our classes and we're watching videos, or it'll be go to this website and take some notes. But what about creating that website? What about putting out those videos ourselves? And those are things I think that we can learn even more from. Now, in the course of 21st century education reform, many brand new organizations have been created. I saw ParentRevolution.org, Students for Education Reform, many of these other organizations. We've heard from administrators, teachers, consultants, politicians, parents. But one key voice I've seen missing over and over again is that of the student. And when I go to some large education conferences that have superintendents of districts and other stakeholders, they'll often use that term, stakeholders, actually, and I'll hear that and I'll think, okay, you're talking about stakeholders, but who is the biggest stakeholder in education? Whose future is most determined by education? Whose daily life is most affected by education? And the stakeholder who is often ignored or not mentioned or represented too often is the student. So keeping us silent is a fundamental flaw in any education reform program or plan. And I've taken steps to really try to share my voice on a more local level. I wrote a letter to my local school district asking what structures the district had in place to solicit student voice. It was a pretty long letter. It was like, I don't know, 7, 8 paragraphs. And to my disappointment, I received a polite acknowledgement reply back that, listed a couple of boards that if they wanted, students could come testify at. But there were no really definable steps for further action, invitations for students to come and speak, or any questions asked about what is it like to be a student in our district? How do you feel your school is serving you? So for those of you who are in roles where you make decisions frequently about your schools and school districts, so probably most of you, ask yourself, is there a student involved here? What would a student's input on this look like? Am I asking a student? And if you find at any point that the answer to that is no, then you can go ahead and fix it with something as simple as asking for a group of students to be called in. Another point is that, again, people will say, well, you're exceptional, of course we'll listen to students like you, but what about students who are going to give us answers like, no more homework, take away grades, and we want school to be out every day? Well, the thing is that there are no better or worse students when it comes to listening to us. There are no superior, inferior students, students whose voices should be heard and students whose voices shouldn't be heard. The voice of a student who is in a special education or an ESL class or who gets Fs or is about to drop out is every bit as valuable as mine or any of my classmates in an AP class who are surely on the track for an Ivy League school. And I think that the idea that we should listen to some student voices but not others is at its core extremely undemocratic and reflects badly on school leadership. So it's a call for student voices, but not just a few student voices, all student voices. Because only then, when we model this listening to students, can we provide an example of what students should aspire to be great listeners as well as speakers, to be great learners as well as teachers. So in the wake of getting this polite reply from my school district, I definitely didn't give up. I figured out, how can I organize larger action? There must be other students, not only in my school and in other schools, but also really teachers and educators who want to band together and help us as we try to get student voice to be incorporated more. So I started a group called the Student Union, and I definitely highly encourage you all to join it, please, and check out some of the discussions we have there. We've been posting a lot of resources. People will post things about conferences that they've spoken at, videos, speeches, different books, all kinds of things. And what I really wanted to do was to make a place for students to voice their concerns, their insights, their action plans, or what could be changed. So here was one of the very first discussions that we had, which was asking everyone to introduce themselves. And people wrote some really detailed responses. My friend Irene asked, what is a teacher? And Hannah said, this is how I like to think of it. A teacher is somebody who is walking on a path seeking understanding. A student comes along and asks which way to go. The teacher points down the path and they walk together. A lot of people assume the teacher's already at the end of the road, but I like to think that the road doesn't end. Which is a really poetic expression to me of what a teacher is. It inspired me a lot to read that. Nikhil said, they doubted, you believed, I succeeded, which is extremely catchy. And Nikhil actually is a great example of a success story of student voice in the sense that extremely discontented with his school and with the system and having a lot of energy to channel all of his thoughts about education reform, he authored a book, which has just come out actually, One Size Does Not Fit All, and it contains his voice on education. I had the chance to read some early chapters, and it is inflammatory and passionate and definitely worth reading. It'll be really polarizing, but I think that it is so awesome that a student has stood up and published a book specifically on education as he has. So within the student union, we had all these discussions. A lot of people were really active, saying that they wanted history to really come alive instead of be a series of facts that needs to be memorized. Ethan talking about getting rid of boring lecture style in science class and having everything we learned through experiments and incredible projects, which I thought was really worth thinking about. So yeah, the student union that features all of these kinds of questions, answers, resources being posted, I felt like that was a great channel for me to be able to work towards some of my goals in that area. So despite this great possibility for connecting with us, and despite the fact that more often than not we might use the internet to do our homework, and it's how we're connecting with our families and organizations online. When we walk into school, it all turns off. Many schools take a highly restrictive approach to internet use. Let's do a quick survey. There are some different tiers of filtering, like there could be no filtering at all. You walk into school and you can get online and pretty much go anywhere you want. Level 2 would be some filtering, but with educational sites allowed. And level 3 would be a filter that works on guilty until proven innocent. That is, the only websites you can access are ones that the school district put on an approved list. So raise your hand if your school has some internet filtering. Seeing mostly raised hands. Yeah, it would be really unusual for a school to have like no internet filtering whatsoever. I'm pretty sure like pretty much almost impossible. And so yeah, my school definitely has internet filtering. For some reason, Netflix is still unblocked on school netbooks. That was not an evil glint in my eye, believe me. Nor am I planning to do anything nefarious with that knowledge. But they did block Tumblr, Facebook, Gmail, YouTube, pretty much everything else that is social or that requires any kind of login. So anyone have extremely restricted filtering, so the guilty until proven innocent kind? Seeing some raised hands. Wow. So I haven't seen that as much, but I've talked to students who go to school with that. Now to me, and this is just my opinion, I haven't done a whole lot of research about this, and I would like to in the future. I think it's an important issue, but I think that restrictive filtering is a slightly short-term approach. I prefer what I like to call the touch the stove approach, which kind of sounds dangerous, but the name comes from a memory from when I was very young, and I was absolutely incorrigible. I just would always go over to the stove and try to touch it, even though my mom would be like, it's hot, you'll burn yourself. So finally she got frustrated enough to turn the heat down really, really low and say, go ahead. So I was like, and refused to touch the stove again, clearly, because I realized, oh, it's pretty hot. And I didn't burn myself because it was too low, but I learned from that experience, and I didn't clamor to touch the stove again for another long while until I started cooking. That's another story. My parents and I have, again, refused to touch the stove since my cooking is terrible. But my sister were fine, my parents were fine with my sister and me being on the internet from a very young age, and even with us making these ridiculous videos where we would dance around and lip sync to the Numa Numa song. Has anyone heard that? Seeing some raised hands. Okay, it was really popular a few years back. And I'm really glad that we were allowed to do that at that age, because otherwise we would not have known the shame of uploading horrible lip syncing videos to YouTube, and we would do worse stuff in front of a camera during spring break in college. So I think that having had this experience of having to change privacy settings on literally hundreds of videos to private, out of embarrassment, we'll be a little more wary next time of what we upload. And in fact, sometimes I have more discretion of what we post on Facebook and stuff than my mom does. My mom will take a picture of me falling asleep at a restaurant and think that that is funny, while I am like, Mom, why would you do that? So it is a perfect example of how touching the stove worked to educate me about what should be kept private online, what should not be uploaded online, and for my sister as well. Another analogy that you might use, never teach a child to walk across the street when they're little, and they won't know how to do it safely when they reach adulthood. We go to school and we power off the cell phones and laptops and avoid blocked websites like personal blogs, Gmail, YouTube, Facebook, but you know that when we go home, we'll power on our own computers and go straight to those websites anyway. So, in contrast, in some other schools, educators really embrace the possibilities of social networking. Some teachers even set up their own Twitter accounts or Facebook pages to stay in touch with students. During the campaign for AP Gov, we got to post our opening statements on YouTube, and I was sitting, because of all my experience with filtering and how restrictive schools can be sometimes, I was waiting for that. Oh, and if you have any privacy concerns with YouTube, and here's this disclaimer you must sign so that your parents do not sue us. But there was none of that. It was just taken as this realistic expectation that we were all, going to upload it to YouTube. And to me, that represented a real step forward in education. A great example of positive internet use comes from the example of Esther Wojcicki, and she's a longtime teacher of journalism at Palo Alto High School in California. And in her class, she teaches students skills of journalism, including how to evaluate sources for truth, clarity, and bias, and looking at sources both online and off critically. She's not trying to avoid the problem of the barrage of sometimes unreliable information on the internet. She's confronting it head on. and her students are thriving. Their school has 5 publications, including some magazines, and they have an entirely student-run and edited full-print newspaper, the Campanile, which can be found online. And it includes some amazing insights and articles about the students' educational experiences, so it has some great published examples of student voice and just about everything else. Now, to me, though, the idea that you should evaluate sources critically, that shouldn't just be a skill that you learn in journalism class. That's a 21st century skill that students should be taught in school as digital citizens. In my own experience, having a blog from a young age was, again, key to showing me what do you share, how do you ensure that your audience enjoys what you're reading, how do you write with clarity and make sure that your sources are accurate. So if schools are worried about student privacy, of course, there's always the possibility of making these blogs private and filtering comments. But I think that students shouldn't be overly protected from the big bad world of the internet. I wrote this post for Gulf News in Dubai, actually, as a columnist, and I find that students, especially in the modern world, are oftentimes a whole lot less innocent than parents might like and teachers might like to think. And so it can be a little bit reductive to say, oh, we'll just filter everything, as opposed to teaching us how to evaluate sources critically and know how to navigate the internet. So the internet, to me, of course, it's a place where there are, you don't want to go some places, but it was really crucial to my learning in early childhood, so I have a more positive view of how it can be used in education. My mom set up email accounts for my sister and me when many other kids were just learning how to write longhand, and I got to write letters to my grandmother, and that taught me a whole lot about writing and becoming a better correspondent. In some families, and in most schools I know, there isn't this early access and openness around internet use. So we have these tools at our disposal. They're waiting and ready to go. The innovative school is no longer going to be a monolithic experience. It's going to be a patchwork of many different opportunities, formats, people, relationships, online and off. But I want to ask you a question. Which of these images looks most like your typical average school to you? A, B, or C? So raise your hand for A. Raise your hand for B. Raise your hand for C. Seeing mostly raised hands, okay. So yeah, A is an image, I believe, from Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, and B is an image of, I believe, the library at the British Museum, and C is a picture of a hallway of the prison at Robben Island, the same one where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 20 years. But when the schools we go to every day look more like prisons than they do cathedrals or libraries, we have a problem. It's not just looks. A prison imprisons people. The traditional school model that we're also used to, that 19th century model that students are stuck in, it imprisons learning by treating learning like it's something we can only do 7 hours a day, 5 days a week by listening to one source of information in one place. That just doesn't make sense anymore. Now we have so many sources of learning, and the ability to liberate it from being confined within 4 walls and a whiteboard. I understand the architectural limitations and reasoning behind the current model that would make it look like that, but I think that we can work to change the ethos of schools that treat learning as something to be restricted to a building. Creating lifelong learners starts with the understanding that our world is the best classroom of all. Teachers can come from all places and be of all ages. They can be young people like Eva Reidenhauer and Cameron Manor, the girls that you saw teaching in those videos who have a camera and internet access. They can be people like Sal Khan, whose Khan Academy you've probably heard of, and it has over 3,100 teaching videos. So when I think of a vision for an ideal school, one that liberates learning instead of imprisons it, I ask questions. What if instead of prisons, schools were more like libraries in the sense of acting as portals to knowledge and discovery, and more like cathedrals, not in the religious sense, but in inspiring students to learn with purpose and to look upward? Realizing the power and potential of harnessing youth digital culture about students for educational purposes, seeking students' voices directly on educational issues, and ensuring that everything we learn allows us to have an impact in the world. These are the actions we need to take to journey on the road ahead for the student of today. To go back to the story of my AP Gov campaign, fingers crossed that I made a good impression on my potential constituents, I want to tell you something larger about the impact of the campaign and the class on me. So I told you that I was following the Bush-Gore campaigns in 2000. I wasn't even really joking. Back when I was 3 years old, I know it's kind of ridiculous, but I would listen to those sound bites, not say that much, but then later when my mom would take my sister and me to go on a walk to the local park, I would climb up onto this big boulder that was there and basically use it as my stage and give these long, rambling, impromptu speeches on why everyone should vote for me. I'm told it was really cute, but I think it might have been creepy if I were just walking past. I went to my first political rally when I was 10 years old, back in 2008. Yet, despite all this, I would often dismiss the idea of running for office, kind of vacillating between the ideas of doing it and not, much like a real politician, actually. And in the process of learning in this class and running in this fictional campaign, I realized, or like miniature campaign, I should say, they are voting, I realized a lot about how addicting politics, even on such a tiny scale as this is. As I declared to my parents in a moment of excitement, I wish this were my life, and I was pretty serious. Of course, the Svitack 2012 campaign may only be my life for a week, but the integration of technology to develop a game plan, the passion and dedication of a group of high school students whom you might think at this age would be apathetic about politics, and a 15-year-old girl's newfound or rediscovered interest in political office. All this reflects what can happen when an educator creates a learning environment conducive to self-directed, self-motivated, and self-inspired learning. Thank you. So, is there time for questions? Pardon? Is there time for questions? Is there time for questions?
Yes, there is.
Oh, perfect. So. Yes?
Not so much a question, but a comment. Wow. I'll try not to cry because it's amazing. I work in special education, and my dream is that special education doesn't need to exist for the majority of the population, because I agree with you. If we don't have that 19th century model, we're not putting round pegs or square pegs in round holes. Special education doesn't need to exist. And I think about my current passion, my 2.5-year-old daughter, and what education means to me as an adult is learning real time how to be a parent. So last week we had to deal with a night terror, which I had no idea what that is, but after we got through it 10 minutes later, I'm Googling on my phone and realized that I did everything the wrong way. But I think like how we can use that in our classrooms to engage our students and their passions, and in that moment, that teachable moment of, I don't know the answer to that question, let's look it up, because we have that at our fingertips. So I just ask all of us to make this come true. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate your deep insights on that. And I find it so interesting that you have the anecdote. Just Googling that in the moment, I think it speaks a lot to the value of in-time learning. I mean, we do a lot, I've heard this, that phrase of like in-case versus in-time learning. And most of the learning that we as students do is definitely, just in-case learning. And I would love to have students go through more teachable moments as well, and for education to allow teachers to be flexible enough to really capitalize on teachable moments, as you did right there. Thank you so much for that. Yes?
So as you toured the country or the world, what have been one of your favorite questions from a student?
What has been one of my favorite questions from a student? That is an excellent question. I would say I received a lot of good ones. This is a terrible question, but I should not say that about any question whatsoever. There's no such thing as a terrible question. But I remember I was video conferencing with a group of students in New York, and I think a suburb of the city, and they were going on and on actually about, like, once one student, especially in elementary school, starts with the what is your favorite blank, then every single student will do that, and it'll go on and on and on until it's exhausted itself. And so one student finally says, so what's your favorite sports team, and did you watch the Super Bowl, or who do you think should have won? All I remembered was, in that moment, I kind of panicked, because I did not follow sports whatsoever. And I had not watched the Super Bowl. But thank goodness I remembered that the Giants had won. And then they were in New York, so I was like, oh, the Giants, of course, I'm a really big fan of them. And I think that was my favorite question, because it put something into perspective for me, which was that before I had been really kind of, I don't know, I was like, oh, sports are kind of dumb, I'm not going to watch football, stuff like that. I still don't really, to tell the truth. But I realized how important it is to find issues of common interest and to find commonalities with people, even though those issues, you might not come naturally to them. And it made me think, okay, that, like, my last minute save on the answer to that question, you know, like, I want to be able to connect with a student like that kid. If I want to be a good teacher, I really need to be able to do that, whether it's something like a football team or it's knowing, you know, an element of culture. So I think that taught me a lot about why it's important to connect with elements of culture. Really long-winded answer, sorry, but that was a question that taught me a lot, I guess. Yes.
Do you think that schools and classrooms should be evaluated, and if so, how?
Should schools and classrooms be evaluated, and if so, how? Great question. I think that this one's a tricky one. I do think that, like most jobs, there should be a way for there to be some measure of accountability. However, I feel that the word accountability has become tied too closely to things that don't really effectively measure merit. Students' test scores. I mean, if you're a teacher who received an assignment to a bunch of students who maybe come into the class with drastically different performance levels than the teacher in the classroom next door, of course you're going to look worse on an evaluation. So I think that that is extremely unfair, just from a basic point of view. As a student, however, I would like to be able to have a place to say, here's what I think of this teacher, how they can improve. I don't think it would necessarily have to be an evaluation that is tied to pay or that is tied to whether the teacher keeps their job, but there just needs to be an effective way for teachers to be able to receive consistent feedback from students for that integration of student voice to happen, and I think evaluation would be part of that. Yes?
It sounds like your parents showed a lot of courage in allowing you to become, you and your sister to become independent learners at such a young age. How would you recommend that we help other parents have that courage? How do we as teachers instill that courage in parents to allow their children to determine their own learning arc?
Great question. I think that to kind of go to why a lot of parents are maybe a little afraid to do that, I have a lot of friends whose parents are extremely traditional in the sense that, well, I mean, they have very high expectations. They want their sons and daughters to be in the most advanced classes possible, get the highest grades possible, and they don't really accept alternatives or much self-direction in how they're learning. And I think that a big part of that is they feel in order to be successful, you have to follow one path. So one of the best things to do is to show examples of how success can follow all kinds of different directions. I think that's been helped a little bit by some very high-profile examples of people who have really started their own paths. But too often, I mean, we see someone like, for instance, Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates. They do it in college, and I think that, or even after dropping out of college, and I think a lot of parents assume that high school is too young for students to make decisions. So showing examples of young people who have already started making decisions. I think Thiel's a great example who he was writing a book. He's had more absences from school that he's like on the cusp of, hey, you have too many absences, you won't graduate on time, yet he's still pushing forward to work for change he believes in. Another great example of a young person who's doing self-directed learning is Lean Dalil, and she's in Dubai, and her sister, and she had been just schooling themselves, basically using online courses and building their own curriculum since they were quite young. So having more examples of young people like this, to share with parents, to share with students, to hold up as models, I think can be an effective way to dispel the idea that we are not capable or responsible enough to do it at this age.
Thank you.
Yes?
What are your thoughts on the lack of, I guess, digital equity for students in inner city schools and youth who still in 2011 don't have internet access and the risk, and how do you think we bridge that gap?
I feel like the disparities in internet equity, that's like one of the hugest problems that I see in education today. And actually, it's interesting you mentioned that because I just done a little bit of research on that in one of my advertisements to the campaign because I was trying to really run as an education candidate. So that is something that I feel like I, as a student in a school district right by Microsoft, really affluent, I didn't see it firsthand. at all, but then I heard from enough teachers who were saying, you know, like the computers in my classrooms are barely working, the students go home and they don't really have broadband internet and stuff like that. I think that one-to-one computing, if there is the budget within a district, can be a great way to address that, but even devices, I know that some schools are applying for technology grants from the Department of Education that can be, I believe are easier access if schools like Title I or has special financial need, and they're using that to say bring like one device to a group for students, just any way to get technology in the classrooms for students to create content as well. I think that internet equity is not only a pressing issue for its educational value, but also just for, it's a moral imperative that students in an inner city school district have the same access to the technologies that students in an affluent suburb do. So yeah, I would say that making solutions available using grants, sometimes from the federal government, state departments, technology, maybe working with nonprofits as well could be a possible solution. Yeah, thanks. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
So, Adora, thank you so very much. Tell you things about food and all that stuff. Before I do that, I have a test for you. So, it's after this program, and Adora will SYB. And don't forget to turn in your evaluation from this wonderful, wonderful teacher. Thank you.